If you're a founder, you know that fundraising is a big part of the job. What you might not know is that Carta is there to help. Carta's new fundraising suite provides startups of all stages the best tools and support to easily issue safes, accurately forecast dilution, and quickly close funding rounds. Save time, money, and make your next round your best yet. To learn more or to get started, go to carta.com/fundraise. That's carta.com/fundraise. Welcome to Inc. for Starters with Alexa Von Tobel. I'm Alexa, a serial entrepreneur myself and founder and managing partner of Inspired Capital, a venture firm that backs fearless founders who are solving some of the biggest challenges facing humanity. Now in our 6th season, we sit down each week with one of the best founders on the planet to hear their story of guts, inspiration, and drive. Let's dive right in. Hi, everybody. I'm your host, Alexa Von Tobel, and this week I'm excited for you to meet Bill Smith, founder and CEO of Landing, the first membership-based leasing model for flexible living. As a serial entrepreneur, Bill started Landing in 2019 and has scaled the business across the country with a network of thousands of apartments. Along the way, he's amassed $255 million in funding, been named Forbes' next billion-dollar startup, all while making renting your next apartment as easy as ordering takeout. Think about that. Prior to Landing, Bill founded, scaled, and exited 3 companies, including the online grocery delivery marketplace Shipt, which sold to Target for $550 million. Bill is also a member of the 2018 class of Henry Crown Fellows within the Aspen Global Leadership Network at the Aspen Institute and was named Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year, Southeast Region. With that, let's welcome Bill. Bill, first of all, I'm so excited to have you on today. Thank you so much for your time. You're a serial entrepreneur through and through. Let's start with your latest venture. Let's talk about Landing. What is Landing in your own words?
So Landing is really a way for people to live flexibly. Started the company to give people opportunity to live whenever, wherever they want and give them ultimate flexibility. And we're really created the category of flexible living.
First of all, sounds fabulous. Tell us a little bit more. You're on a mission to make renting apartments as easy as ordering takeout. And to your point, it's not, right? Renting an apartment is very complicated, lots and lots of logistics. Walk us through what the user experience is behind Landing.
I'll start with what it looked like before Landing. The typical apartment renting process is actually a lot of telephone and email driven. So it's seeing ads on sites like Craigslist, calling, trying to reach people, leaving voicemails. It's very old school. It's definitely stuck in the 90s. And so with Landing, you can actually go to our site. You can search for homes in cities all across the country where we operate. And then you can literally book it, and it takes about 2 minutes. And you've booked an apartment, and that can be your home for the next year or the next month. And you literally just show up with your bags and you're ready to roll. Super easy.
What was the ideation behind Landing? And in some ways, it's sort of a WeWork, but for living, where you can be flexible and you can move. And so talk about the aha moment, and then talk about the complexity of building this. What does this actually look like behind the scenes to try to get rid of some of the complexity?
I got into this idea when I was really deep into solving another problem. So I grew up in Birmingham. That's where I live today. And when I started Shipt, I realized that I needed to go to San Francisco to do a couple things. One is I needed to raise money. I had never raised venture capital before, and I knew I needed to make a move to San Francisco to do that. And also wanted to go and bring people on my team that had built other large consumer businesses. So sat down with my wife and said, hey, we need to go to San Francisco for a while. Shipt is getting a lot of traction. It was early days, but it was definitely clear it was going to work. And I needed to find a place for us to live. And at the time, we had a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old. So little kids, needed a place. And I remember going to Craigslist, searching for apartments in San Francisco, calling all these brokers, and I had to fill out multiple paper applications. And it was just a huge pain. And I said, man, this is crazy. This is a huge market. The apartment market in the US is absolutely massive market. There's about 40 million units. And so I saw an opportunity, but clearly I couldn't do anything about it right then. I was very deep into the Shipt problem. So I just put it on my list of ideas. And fast forward a couple years later, after the exit and after I kind of went through the transition process, I picked this problem up as my first one to go solve.
I love this so much. By the way, I'm sure your wife loved that convo with 2 little kids. You're like, we got to move. She's like, really? Let's talk a little bit about Landing. You launched it in 2019. and you were just in a handful of markets. Today, landing is available in almost every major market across the country. Obviously, geographic expansion can be a giant operational challenge. And with Shipt, you learn to master operations behind the scenes. Talk a little bit about your playbook for growth and who's the ideal customer for you today.
Yeah. So when I started landing, we started in 6 markets initially. So it was New York, San Francisco, LA, Birmingham, Austin, and Dallas. And I thought those were all key cities, kind of a mix of larger cities and then the fast growing Sunbelt market. And usually when I started Shipt, we kind of started a different way where we started in the South and expanded outward. So we moved into Florida and moved to the Midwest. And I kind of learned a lot about what worked and what didn't there. And my joke was I wanted to be like Verizon Wireless. I needed to have options everywhere because I thought to build a national, a brand, and ultimately a global brand in this space, if you're not available in a major city, then you really can't be helpful to the member because you want to be reliable and available for them anywhere.
I love that. Can we talk a little bit about your vision for landing? And you clearly have a point of view, a decade plus long point of view. And as somebody who's been a serial entrepreneur and you know how to build businesses, fast forward 5, 10, 15 years, how do you feel like the category of rentals evolves?
Yeah, so here's what I think is going to happen. Today, someone graduates college, they go and rent their first apartment. They're generally buying some furniture, they move it in and they kind of live year to year. So every time their lease is up for renewal, they're making the decision whether to renew it or move to a new location. And if they get a new job opportunity halfway through that lease, they're having to have a negotiation with their landlord, probably pay break fees, things like that to be able to move. I think in 10 years, what's going to happen is that first apartment out of college is going to be a landing. You're going to choose to say, hey, I'm just going to do flexible living for a while, not sure what my life is going to look like. And for that period of people's lives, which by the way is getting longer and longer that they're renting, they'll just kind of be where they want and not have to deal with the pain and headaches of being locked in a lease, owning furniture, loading the U-Haul truck, moving it around, throwing all the stuff away that people ultimately throw away. If you kind of see the old IKEA furniture on the sidewalk kind of deal, like that'll all go away. And ultimately, you'll have a nicer place, a better lifestyle, more flexibility by choosing flexible living.
Clearly, you have a hypothesis on people wanting more flexibility. I want to pull on that thread. Tell me more what you see there, Bill.
It's not a new phenomenon. I think people have always chased, in a lot of cases, economic opportunity, particularly when we're young. I mean, I did it. I'm from Alabama. I moved completely to the opposite end of the country for an opportunity. And when you have these things that tie you down, and a traditional residential lease, it's kind of like being anchored down. It could cost $10,000, $20,000 to break a lease, and if you think about that, that's a lot of money to people. So with landing, we're really giving people that freedom to chase opportunity, go where they have opportunity, and I think that's a huge unlock for people and one I experienced myself. I had the ability to do it. It wasn't that big of a deal for me to make it happen from a financial perspective, but most of the time that's not the case.
I want to transition a little bit, Bill, to Shipt. First of all, what was Shipt in your own words? I know many of us have used it. I've used it many, many times. Talk about sort of the aha moment for Shipt and then what you're most proud of as you built that business.
Shipt was and is a marketplace for online grocery delivery. And when I initially thought of this idea, it was 2014. And this was the time when on demand services were just coming about. Uber had just launched, Lyft was coming around, Postmates, all of these companies were launching. And so I thought I was going to create Shipt really for the purpose of offering same day delivery to customers of big box retail and had no interest in doing groceries at all initially. I thought you would just be able to go to maybe Best Buy or Home Depot, buy some of their products and choose to have it shipped at checkout. And then we would pull it from the local store, deliver it to your door. So I started calling all these companies And I visited Home Depot. I called on Target. I called on a bunch of national retailers. And the response was kind of like, "Who are you?" I hadn't raised any venture capital. I was just a guy from Birmingham. And I quickly realized I was going to have a chicken egg problem here where it's going to be really difficult to build this delivery network and this whole platform without customers and without retailers.
Yep.
So I hacked my way into it. And in the process, I found out people don't really care a lot about getting something from Best Buy in an hour, but they really wanted groceries and they were asking for this. And at the same time, my wife and I had our second child and made our first trip to the grocery store with these two little kids and learned firsthand the difficulties of that. And that's what ultimately led to what Shipt is today.
What was the hardest part of managing such an intense logistics business? And there's a lot of logistics that go into groceries, getting them delivered, people want them quickly, things not broken, all that. What did you learn about complexity?
I learned that groceries are very complicated. It is not simple at all, actually. And some of the challenges, think about fruit and vegetables, there's a lot of subjectivity into that. Some people like bananas that have a lot of green. Some people want their bananas to be yellow. I mean, that's just one example. But the real challenge we had was e-commerce did not exist for groceries yet. This was 2015 when we started working on groceries. There was nowhere to go to even get a database of what was on the store shelves. And I assumed that every store, at least for one retailer, let's take Publix or Target, I assumed that they would have the same items on the shelf at every location. That's not the case. Actually, many locations sell different items based on the demand from their customers. So we had to figure out how to just build a catalog at first. And you wouldn't believe the crazy stories. We sent people in with cameras to take pictures of every 4 feet of aisle space in the store. Our people were getting kicked out by the store managers. We had to kind of covertly figure out how to do this. And that's just one example of many problems. You had to make sure that items were delivered fresh and that the temperatures were right. And this is in the South. So there's a crazy amount of logistical challenges of what seems to be a really simple business.
Oh my God, photos of every 4 feet. I can only appreciate the fun of solving those types of problems. Bill, very few entrepreneurs get to go through acquisitions. One of the things we talk a lot about at Inspired Capital, we're kind of in a moment where IPO markets have been relatively closed. It's an extraordinarily high bar. Not everybody wants to take their company public. I obviously sold a business for $375 million to Northwestern Mutual. You sold Shipt to Target. Talk a little bit about what you learned about going through an acquisition as an exit, the negotiation of it. What did you learn?
I've been fortunate to have 3 exits, and each one of those was very different, learned a lot in each one. And I think it really comes down to it's not a company buying your company, it's a person
Yes.
buying your business.
Yes.
And it's usually 1 or 2 people inside of the acquirer that are going to be the champion for this deal. And what I've realized, it's an acquisition in some ways is almost like doing a big enterprise deal or a big partnership where, somebody's putting their job on the line. Generally, it's your business is not being bought by the founder of the company. They're generally a professional. They're either in the C-suite or they're on the M&A team or something like that. And at the end of the day, they don't want to get fired and they do not want to do a bad deal. So trust, I think, is super critical. So I think of selling a company very similar to selling a product. That company is a product. It's my product and my team's product. And I want to deliver something to them that years down the road, they can say, I'm really glad we did this. And one of my favorite lines I actually learned from a World War II veteran that I met. His daughter actually was my assistant years ago, and I was able to meet him. And I took him on what's called an honor flight, where you take World War II veterans to the World War II monument in Washington, D.C. And one of the lines I learned from him, he would say, a sale is not the end of a transaction, it's the beginning of a responsibility. And I think that just resonates with me on these acquisitions. It's a product you're selling, and you're going to be judged later on by how well it works out.
Not only do I agree with you wholeheartedly, I think you just hit the nail on the head that it is a person or a group of people on the other side. You sold Shipt to Target for $550 million. What's the hardest part of it? And what advice do you have for all of us there?
I'll break it into two major pieces, a pre-acquisition and post-acquisition. I think on the pre-acquisition part, it requires a lot of patience. You probably experienced this. These things, they don't just happen in 2 weeks. Usually there's a conversation, and then every one of my deals, actually months have gone by from the point that I met somebody to the point of us even having an LOI. It's very much like an extended dating process, and you can't finish the date and send a text that night and schedule the next one. You got to be a little relaxed about it. So I think it takes a lot of patience and understanding of what the other side has to go through to make a deal happen. And then post acquisition, there's a lot to be worked through depending on what the acquirer wants to do after the deal.
Yep.
And I kind of view my job as almost mediating between the acquirer and my business and my team, and looking at things from both sides and trying to help guide this to where it's going to be successful. Because, a lot of acquisitions are not successful. Many of them can fail, and you got to help the acquirer do the right things, really understand the business. And it takes time. You don't just know a business after 6 months. So you're trying to help the acquirer make the right decisions and also help the team understand that things do have to change. You can't go through an acquisition and say nothing's going to change. Something will change. Many things will change. And it's coaching the team and keeping everybody engaged and ultimately getting to the goal that exists.
I think that's really, really well said. And we'll be right back after a message from our sponsors. Alexa here. Not only do I get the opportunity to speak with all types of founders on the Inc. Founders Project podcast, I'm also a founder myself. I believe that when the world zigs, you have to zag. So in 2008, when the entire world was in free fall during the global financial crisis, I decided to drop out of business school to solve a problem I couldn't get out of my head. LearnVest was born, and I set out on my fundraising journey to build the first digital financial manager accessible to the masses. I can't stress enough how vital fundraising is to a startup and how many no's I had to endure. Carta knows this and had founders in mind when they created their fundraising suite, providing tools and support to take the friction out of fundraising and saving founders time and money, allowing founders to focus on their goals, not the admin work needed to close a round. From simply issuing safes to quickly receiving funds, Carter's fundraising suite helps their cap table customers raise a better fundraising round. To learn more or to get started, go to carta.com/fundraise. That's carta.com/fundraise. I want to go back to you, Bill. You grew up in Birmingham, which I just recently went to on my book tour. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. I always like to think about, for somebody like you, factually, 3 companies sold, a real repeat entrepreneur to your core. You were a real builder mindset. You now have your own children. And I'm sure there's some things from your own childhood that you're repeating for your children. And so I always like to ask, if there was a straight line from your childhood to where you are today that you credit to being very important for your success, what would it be?
Really, I pulled from both. My mom is a highly empathetic person, cares a lot for people, has a huge heart. And I learned a lot of that from her, just empathy and understanding. And I was also able to kind of grow up and experience life from a lot of different perspectives. I mean, when I was a kid, my clothes came from the thrift store, so I've lived lower middle class, middle class. I've lived all these different experiences. And then for my father was an entrepreneur, and I was able to see him build businesses and all of the grind associated with it. I saw him have failures and successes, and kind of combining that experience from both of my parents really has helped me in a huge way.
I love that. And it's funny, seeing somebody in your life be an entrepreneur does fully alter the way that you think about work and what work is. You said that you've never loved school and you started a cell phone business while you were just in high school. Where did that early spark of entrepreneurship come from?
Yeah, so never was a huge fan of school. I was probably fine in the elementary, middle school years, but by the time I was in high school, really just wanted to go to work. I just wanted to go do business. I've always loved business. I wanted a briefcase when I was 5 years old for my birthday, which my parents did give me. So I've always been very into business and technology. And when I was growing up, we just called them computers. I was into computers. So I really always wanted to bring those things together. The funny thing is, my wife has all the degrees in the family. That's the joke. And I want my kids to go to school, and I hope they choose to go to college and all of those things. But it wasn't for me. And I think that the prescribed path doesn't always work for everybody. And I think as parents, I'm kind of okay with that. I think we've got to be okay with our kids choosing different paths. Maybe one of my kids wants to go learn a trade. Right now my son says he wants to build airplanes. So, who knows? But I think being open to different paths, there's a lot of different ways to be successful in this country. And if you're willing to work hard and you can go out and find what the customer needs, there's a lot of ways to solve it and build something successful. And it doesn't all have to start with college.
That's awesome. One of the things I absolutely love that you just did, you have a recent post on Twitter that you shared where you brought your 11-year-old son to a recent landing board meeting. I love this. Can you just tell us a little bit about your thought process on the why and what you think your son learned?
So I really got this idea because I believe if you see it, you can do it. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know if my son or any of my daughters will want to go into business. Kind of secretly hope they do, but I really want it to be up to them to choose their own path. But as much as I can let them learn by seeing me do it, I think it's giving them an advantage. So I asked my son, "Hey, do you want to go to a landing board meeting?" He said, "Sure." I don't really know what it's like, but I want to do it. And he put on his little sport coat and came to the board meeting. He sat right next to me. And I told him in advance, I said, "Landing's doing a lot of challenging things right now. You're going to get to see me answer a lot of hard questions. We're having to solve a lot of problems. And you're going to get to see that firsthand." And he came in, I gave him the board deck in advance. I let him go through and come up with questions. And so he had a list of questions even before the board meeting, and then he added to it after. Some of the questions on his notebook were: what is CAC, customer acquisition cost? What does LTV mean? What does upside mean? I think he heard us talking about upside in our forecast or something. So he was able to get a feel for this. And actually, almost every one of my board members has told me one off later on that they really enjoyed having him there, seeing him ask questions. I loved it. He loved it. I think it was great. Now, I don't know. I think it's kind of unusual to bring a kid to a board meeting, but it's definitely something I'm going to do going forward. I think once a year, I want him to be at a board meeting. I want my daughters to come and experience that when they get a little bit older. And I think as parents, the more we can get them exposure to our work, it doesn't have to be a board meeting. It just be going to a job site or, just seeing what we do day to day, I think really helps connect the dots for them.
I love it. I agree with you. And one thing I always talk about, Bill, is I think the positioning of like, oh, I'm so sorry, mommy, daddy have to go to work. I actually say to my kids, mommy loves work. Mommy is so lucky to go to work. Work is a fun place where mommy does puzzles all day, but big ones with people and problems, and that mommy really loves doing. So I love everything that you just said. You have this great piece of advice, which is to build the first version of your idea as quickly as you humanly can. Tell us more.
So the reason that I talk about this is it's difficult for our friends and family to tell us the truth. So if I have an idea and I go around and ask all my friends and family, they're probably going to say, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea." But they may not really think that. And I think you have to admit and just understand that that's just kind of the way a lot of people are wired. I'm not that way. I will tell people the truth. And sometimes that might be to my detriment if they can't handle it. I think a lot of investors may not tell founders the truth because they want to hold out the option value of maybe later on they'll come back around and will be a deal I want to do. So I try to tell people straight up front what I think. But my goal when I have an idea is to see if I can get people to pay me for it before I build it. With Shipt, that was a pre-launch campaign where I said, "Look, I've got to get 1,000 people in Birmingham to pay for a 1-year subscription to Shipt before I wrote the first line of code." And that worked very successfully. Kind of had the same approach with Landing, where I launched a few apartments to see if I could get people to sign up before I announced it or really invested any capital in it. And that test doesn't assure success, but it does solve one thing, which is to make sure that people actually want to buy what you're thinking about building. and it's been super helpful to me. And I've learned the lesson the hard way. I mean, I built the first version of Shipt where we were delivering for big box retail. I built this whole platform, invested a bunch of money and resources and time into building the software, and we literally threw every single line of that code away when we switched to grocery delivery.
I love that, Bill. And I agree with you. You got to remove all the bias and just kind of get to the core brass taxes of, is this a problem that is painful enough that people will pay for it? I'm going to move to the quick fire round. First thing that comes to your mind. What is a book that you would recommend to people of any kind that left a real dent on you, made a big impact?
Well, the book that led me to drop out of high school was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I read that book and said, I'm done with high school. And my favorite now is Good to Great. Love that book.
I love that, Bill. What is an interview question you like to ask to really get to know who people are?
Who's the best boss you've ever had and tell me why?
What comes out of that?
If I can find out what someone liked about working with their boss, it's usually someone that helped them grow. And I'm trying to find out what area someone has been trying to grow in and what their challenges have been to know if I'm going to be a good fit for them. I don't want to hire somebody if I can't help them grow. My goal is everybody that works for me, I want them to learn more with my company or with their experience with my business than they do anywhere else. And I want to identify people that really have that growth mindset.
I love that so much. What is a quote or a mantra that's kind of like burned into your soul?
Success isn't forever and failure isn't fatal. And I think as an entrepreneur, we really have to remember that. I've seen high highs, I've seen low lows, and you have to kind of be down for that if you're going to be an entrepreneur because you're going to experience all ends of the spectrum. And just remembering that quote has been really helpful to me.
I love it. When you think about the biggest pinch me moment to date in your career, so like the day where you came home and said to your family or your spouse, like, I can't believe this happened. What was that day?
It has to be the day that we announced the Shipt Target deal. I started that morning very early at Shipt's headquarters. I'm sitting in a conference room with the CEO and the COO, and we're talking to CNBC about this and what all we're going to do. And then we flew back to Birmingham, and I was able to announce this to the whole team. And it was just an amazing day, one that I will probably never forget.
I love that so much. First of all, Bill, thank you so much for joining me. I am so proud and honored that we are also both fellow Henry Crown Fellows, which is an amazing program that we both share in common. Everybody, if you want to learn more about flexible living, you got to head to hellolanding.com. That's hellolanding.com. I hope you continue to use Shipt. Everyone out there, it's a fabulous product, and I have really saved my life on many occasions using it. And you can join us next week for a new episode of For Starters with Alexa Von Tobel. Bill, we are rooting for you. You are a wonderful, wholesome human being. It is so clear to me that you are doing precisely what you were meant to do in life. And just thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. It was so great to be with you. I'll see you soon.